The late-night television landscape had always been a battleground for political commentary, but nobody expected the war of words between Jimmy Kimmel and President Trump to escalate to such dramatic heights that it would dominate news cycles for months and reshape the relationship between comedy and politics in America. It all started on a Tuesday evening in March when Jimmy Kimmel opened his show with his trademark smirk and a glint in his eye that regular viewers knew meant trouble was coming. The studio audience, packed with eager fans anticipating another night of political satire, had no idea they were about to witness the opening salvo in what would become the most bitter feud between a sitting president and a television comedian in American history. So, our beloved president announced today that he's solving the nation's problems by tweeting at 3 a.m. about celebrities, Kimmel began, his voice dripping with mock admiration as he adjusted his tie and leaned into the camera. Because nothing says presidential leadership like picking fights with people who make jokes for a living. I mean, forget about infrastructure, healthcare, or the economy. What America really needs is a commander-in-chief who treats Twitter like his personal diary, where he works out his feelings about anyone who hurt his feelings that day. The audience erupted in laughter, but Kimmel was just warming up. He had spent hours crafting this monologue with his writing team, knowing that the president's latest policy decisions provided rich material for comedy. And apparently, according to his latest policy announcement, and by policy announcement I mean angry tweet sent while he was presumably watching cable news in his bathrobe, the solution to everything is to make deals. Big deals, small deals, deals with foreign leaders, deals with his own cabinet members before they inevitably quit or get fired. Kimmel continued, his timing perfect as he paused for the audience's laughter to build and subside. I'm waiting for him to announce he's made a deal with gravity to make things fall up instead of down. Folks, I've negotiated the best deal with physics, the best deal. Newton's laws? Fake science. My laws are much better, much, much better. The impression of Trump's speaking style sent the audience into hysterics, but Kimmel wasn't finished. He had been watching the president's recent behavior with growing incredulity, and tonight felt like the right time to address what he saw as increasingly erratic decision-making. But seriously, folks, let's talk about what happened this week. Our president, and I use that term loosely, decided that the best way to handle complex international trade negotiations was to threaten everyone on Twitter and then act surprised when other world leaders stopped taking his calls. It's like watching someone play chess by eating the pieces and then declaring victory. Kimmel stood up from behind his desk, beginning to pace as his energy built. And then, oh, this is my favorite part, when reporters asked him to explain his strategy, he said, and I quote, "My strategy is winning. I always win. I've never lost at anything ever." Really? Never lost at anything? Sir, your casino went bankrupt, your university got shut down, your steak company failed, you couldn't even sell steaks to Americans. We invented the concept of loving steak. The audience was now completely invested in the monologue, hanging on every word as Kimmel delivered line after line of carefully crafted satirical commentary.
But here's what really gets me, Kimmel said, his voice taking on a more serious tone that signaled he was building toward his biggest point. This week, while he was busy tweeting about how amazing he is, 3 major pieces of legislation that could actually help American families got buried in committee because nobody in his own party wants to work with him. Healthcare costs are rising, infrastructure is crumbling, and educational funding is being cut. But hey, at least we know he thinks he's great at everything. The comedian returned to his desk, settling in for what his audience recognized as his closing argument. Look, I get it. Being president is hard. It's the hardest job in the world. But maybe, just maybe, if you're going to take on the hardest job in the world, you should prepare for it with something other than watching television and tweeting your feelings. Maybe read a book, maybe talk to experts, maybe learn what the Constitution actually says before swearing to uphold it. The clip went viral within hours, racking up millions of views across social media platforms. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok were flooded with clips, memes, and reactions. Late-night television rarely generated this level of cultural conversation, but something about Kimmel's delivery had struck a nerve with the American public. But Kimmel had no idea that President Trump was watching from the Oval Office, his jaw clenched and his hands gripping the arms of his leather chair so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. According to later reports from White House staff, the president watched the entire 13-minute monologue in complete silence, his face growing progressively redder with each joke. "Sir, perhaps we should turn this off," suggested a nervous aide who had witnessed Trump's reactions to negative coverage before. "No," Trump replied through gritted teeth. "I want to see all of it. I want to remember every word this failing comedian said about your president." For the next 2 days, Trump's staff noticed a marked change in the president's demeanor. He was more irritable than usual, snapping at advisors and spending long periods staring out the Oval Office windows. His usual confidence seemed shaken, replaced by a simmering anger that made everyone around him nervous. The breaking point came 3 days later at a rally in Columbus, Ohio. Trump had originally planned to focus his speech on economic policy and job creation, but as he took the stage and saw the sea of red hats and enthusiastic faces, he made a spontaneous decision that would escalate the conflict to unprecedented levels. "You know, we have these so-called comedians," Trump began, his voice cold and cutting in a way that immediately shifted the crowd's energy. "These failing television personalities who think they're funny. They think they can attack your president and get away with it. Well, let me tell you about Jimmy Kimmel. Do you know this guy?" The crowd booed on cue, sensing where this was heading. Terrible ratings, by the way. Absolutely terrible. I looked them up this morning, and I look up everything, believe me. And his show is dying faster than a bad deal in Atlantic City. Faster than his career, which ended about 10 years ago, but nobody told him. Trump paused, letting the crowd's reaction build before delivering his next volley. This is a man who couldn't make people laugh if his life depended on it. You want to know how unfunny Jimmy Kimmel is? His own mother changes the channel when he comes on. True story. Very sad. The crowd was eating it up, but Trump was just getting started. His years in entertainment had taught him how to read an audience, and he could sense their bloodlust for more attacks on the Hollywood elite they perceived as their enemies. He's not a comedian. He's a desperate has-been clinging to relevance by attacking your president. His jokes aren't funny. They're pathetic. They're mean-spirited and nasty, just like him. The only reason anyone watches his show is because they fall asleep with the TV on and don't wake up in time to change the channel.
Trump's tone grew increasingly harsh as he warmed to his theme. You know what Jimmy Kimmel is? He's everything that's wrong with Hollywood. He's everything that's wrong with the fake entertainment industry. He sits in his fancy studio in Los Angeles, probably never worked a real day in his life, and he thinks he can lecture hard-working Americans about their president. The crowd's energy was reaching a fever pitch, but Trump wasn't finished. He had been stewing over Kimmel's comments for days, and now he was going to unload everything he had been thinking. Jimmy Kimmel is what happens when you take someone with no talent and give them a television show because they know the right people. He's failed at everything he's touched, and now he's failing at trying to be relevant. The man is a complete and total failure, and his desperate attacks on me prove it." Trump paused for dramatic effect, his steely gaze scanning the crowd of thousands. "And let me tell you something else about Jimmy Kimmel. He's scared. He's terrified that Americans are succeeding under my administration. He's terrified that we're winning so much that people don't need his bitter, unfunny show anymore. He's watching his ratings crash, watching his career end, and he's lashing out like a wounded animal." The president's voice rose to a crescendo as he delivered his final blow. "Jimmy Kimmel represents everything that's wrong with America. The entitlement, the elitism, the complete disconnect from real Americans who work hard and play by the rules. He's a sad, bitter man who's angry that I'm making America great again while his career circles the drain. Sad, very, very sad." The speech clips dominated news cycles for 48 hours, with political pundits, entertainment reporters, and media analysts dissecting every word and tone. Cable news networks ran the clips on loop, while social media exploded with reactions from both sides of the political divide. Some praised Trump for fighting back against Hollywood elites, while others expressed shock at the personal nature of the president's attacks on a comedian. But Jimmy Kimmel was already preparing his response, working with his writing team around the clock to craft what they knew would be the most important monologue of his career. The stakes had been raised dramatically, and Kimmel understood that his response would either solidify his position as a worthy adversary to the president or mark the end of his ability to engage in political commentary. The following Monday night, Kimmel walked onto his set with an unusually serious expression, though the familiar mischievous sparkle never left his eyes. The studio audience, packed beyond capacity, with people eager to witness what promised to be television history, could sense the electricity in the air. "Well, well, well," he began, settling behind his desk with deliberate slowness. "Apparently, I've struck a nerve. The President of the United States, the most powerful man in the world, the leader of the free world, the person who supposedly has the weight of global responsibility on his shoulders, took time out of his busy schedule of whatever it is he does all day between cable news segments to talk about little old me at a political rally." The audience was already chuckling, but Kimmel held up a hand to quiet them. He had a lot to say, and he wanted every word to land with maximum impact. Now, I have to admit, I'm flattered. Here I am, just a failing television personality with terrible ratings, and yet somehow I managed to get under the skin of someone who claims to be the greatest negotiator in history, the best businessman who ever lived, and the smartest person in every room he enters. If I'm so irrelevant, why does he know my name? If my show is dying, why is he watching? If I'm such a failure, why did he spend 15 minutes of a political rally talking about, I don't know, policy?
Kimmel's voice grew more animated as he hit his stride, his years of experience as a performer allowing him to build momentum perfectly. You know what's really funny, and I mean genuinely hilarious, not fake funny like he claims I am? He called me a desperate has-been. This coming from a man who spent decades trying to convince people he was richer than he actually was, more successful than his bankruptcies suggested, and more popular than his approval ratings indicated. This is a man who put his name in giant gold letters on buildings to prove he mattered, who bought full-page newspaper ads to argue with people, and who spent years on Twitter before becoming president arguing with celebrities and reality TV stars.
The audience was warming up, but Kimmel could sense they were waiting for him to really unleash his counterattack. If I'm desperate, what does that make someone who measures their self-worth by crowd sizes and television ratings? What does that make someone who calls news networks to compliment their coverage of him? What does that make someone who keeps score of every slight, real or imagined, from decades ago? Kimmel stood up from his desk, beginning to pace as his energy built to match the gravity of the moment. "But here's the thing that really gets me," Kimmel continued, his tone shifting to mock concern. "He said, 'I'm not funny.' Now that hurts. That really stings. Coming from someone whose biggest joke is his own presidency, that's a low blow. I mean, this is a man who thinks covfefe was an intentional word, who suggested we could cure COVID by injecting bleach, and who thinks windmills cause cancer. Sir, you don't get to lecture anyone about comedy when your entire administration reads like a rejected script from Saturday Night Live written by someone who's never seen Saturday Night Live." The audience exploded in laughter, but Kimmel wasn't done. He had been building to this moment for days, and he could feel the perfect balance of humor and righteous indignation that made for great television. And let's talk about my ratings for a second, since he brought them up. Yes, my ratings have fluctuated over the years. That's what happens in television. You know what else fluctuates? His approval ratings. The difference is, when my ratings go down, I don't call it fake news and blame a conspiracy. When my ratings go down, I work harder and try to be better. When his approval ratings go down, he claims the polls are rigged and attacks the pollsters. Kimmel paused for effect, then delivered what he knew would be his most pointed line. But you know what's the most ironic part of all this? He criticized me for attacking your president. But here's the thing, and this is important, so I want everyone to listen carefully. In America, comedians are supposed to make fun of politicians. It's literally in our job description. It's called the First Amendment. You might have heard of it. It's in that Constitution thing you swore to protect and defend. The crowd erupted, sensing that Kimmel had found his target. The fact that he's this upset about jokes tells us everything we need to know about how secure he really feels in his position. You know who doesn't get upset about comedians making fun of them? Leaders who are confident in their leadership. You know who does get upset? People who know, deep down, that the jokes are hitting too close to home. Kimmel returned to his desk, but his energy remained high as he prepared for his closing argument. And here's what really bothers me about this whole thing. While he was spending 15 minutes at a rally talking about me, 15 minutes that could have been spent talking about healthcare or education or infrastructure or any of the things that actually matter to the people who voted for him, real problems were going unsolved. While he was crafting insults about a late-night talk show host, families were struggling to pay medical bills. While he was worried about my ratings, Americans were worried about their jobs, their kids' schools, and their parents' retirement.
The comedian's voice grew more serious as he built toward his conclusion. So let me be clear about something. I don't hate the president. I don't wish him failure, because his failure would be America's failure. What I want is for him to succeed at the job he was elected to do, leading this country, solving problems, bringing people together. But when he spends his time attacking comedians instead of attacking problems, when he's more concerned with his image than with governing, when he treats the presidency like a reality show where the goal is to create drama and conflict rather than progress and solutions, then yes, I'm going to make jokes about it. Kimmel paused, looking directly into the camera with an intensity that his regular viewers rarely saw. Because that's what comedians do in America. We hold up a mirror to power and make people laugh at what we see. And if what we see makes the powerful uncomfortable, well, maybe that's exactly the point. The audience rose to their feet in thunderous applause, but Kimmel held up his hand one more time. He had one final point to make.
So, Mr. President, if you're watching, and let's be honest, you probably are, because despite calling my show failing, you seem to know an awful lot about what I say on it. Here's a free piece of advice from this failing comedian to the leader of the free world. If you want people to stop making jokes about you, maybe try being less of a joke. And if that doesn't work, maybe try being more of a president. The monologue ended to thunderous applause that lasted nearly 2 minutes, but within hours, reports began emerging from the White House about the president's reaction that would make it clear this feud was far from over. According to multiple sources close to the administration, President Trump watched the entire segment in the White House residence, his face growing redder with each passing minute. Staff members reported hearing raised voices, the sound of objects being thrown, and what one aide described as the angriest I've ever seen him, and that's saying something. He was absolutely livid, one senior White House official confided anonymously to reporters the next day. I've never seen him this angry, not even during the worst moments of his presidency. He kept shouting about how Kimmel had crossed a line, how this was different from other attacks, how no one had ever disrespected the office of the president like this. The source continued. He was pacing around the residence, demanding to know what legal options we had, asking if there was a way to get Kimmel's show canceled, talking about lawsuits and FCC complaints. It took several senior advisors to calm him down enough to explain that you can't actually sue someone for making jokes about you on television. Another White House insider reported that Trump spent hours that night researching Kimmel's background, career, and personal life, looking for ammunition for a counterattack. He had staff pulling up old interviews, failed projects, anything he could use. He was obsessed with finding a way to destroy Kimmel's reputation. The president's fury was confirmed the next morning when he unleashed a series of tweets that many considered his harshest public statements yet about a media figure. Jimmy Kimmel is a disgrace to television and to America. His vicious, unfunny attacks on your president show how low the fake entertainment industry has fallen. No talent. He should be ashamed of himself. His show should be canceled immediately. But the tweets didn't stop there. Throughout the day, Trump continued his digital assault with an unprecedented barrage of social media attacks.
Kimmel's ratings are in free fall because Americans are tired of his nasty, bitter humor. He's not funny, he's just mean. Why do networks keep failing personalities like him on the air? Very unfair to viewers who deserve better. Just learned that Jimmy Kimmel has been attacking me for years while his own career has been a disaster. Multiple failed shows, terrible reviews, and now his current show is dying. Maybe he should focus on being funny instead of being nasty. The so-called comedian Jimmy Kimmel wouldn't last 5 minutes in the real world. He's been protected by Hollywood elites his whole career. No talent, no ratings, no respect. Time for him to go. Jimmy Kimmel is what's wrong with America, bitter, entitled, and completely out of touch with real Americans. His attacks on me are attacks on the 75 million Americans who voted for me. Enough! The unprecedented nature of the president's sustained attack on a late-night host sent shockwaves through both political and entertainment circles. Media analysts noted that while Trump had feuded with journalists, politicians, and other public figures before, the level of personal vitriol directed at Kimmel seemed to indicate that the comedian had touched a particularly sensitive nerve. Political commentators across the spectrum expressed amazement at the situation. Conservative pundit Ben Shapiro tweeted, "While I often disagree with Kimmel's politics, the president spending this much time attacking a comedian raises questions about priorities." Liberal commentator Rachel Maddow observed, "We're witnessing something unprecedented, a sitting president engaged in a sustained personal attack on an entertainer for making jokes. This isn't normal."
Dr. Jennifer Mercica, a professor of political communication at Texas A&M University, provided academic context. What we're seeing is a fundamental misunderstanding of the role of political satire in American democracy. Comedians have been mocking presidents since the founding of the Republic. The fact that this president is responding with such personal vitriol suggests a deep insecurity about his ability to handle criticism. Entertainment industry insiders noted that for a president who had spent years in the media spotlight, being so thoroughly mocked by a professional comedian represented a particular type of humiliation. "Trump understands show business," said one former television executive who had worked with Trump in the past. "He knows that Kimmel outclassed him in that exchange, and he can't stand it." The feud continued to dominate headlines for weeks, with each new development scrutinized by a public fascinated by the spectacle of the President of the United States engaged in a very public war of words with a late-night television host. Cable news networks dedicated entire segments to analyzing the conflict, while social media platforms saw unprecedented engagement as users chose sides and shared memes. Late-night television itself was transformed by the conflict. Other hosts found themselves either supporting Kimmel or trying to stay above the fray, while audiences became more politically engaged with comedy shows than ever before. The ratings for Kimmel's show, ironically, saw a significant boost as curious viewers tuned in to see what the president was so angry about. Comedy clubs across the country reported that audiences were more engaged with political material than they had seen in years. "The Trump-Kimmel thing has made political comedy mainstream again," observed Judy Carter, a comedy teacher and author. "Suddenly, everyone wants to know what comedians think about politics." The conflict also sparked broader conversations about the role of humor in political discourse. Academic conferences were organized around the topic, with scholars debating whether comedy could serve as a form of political resistance or if it merely provided an outlet that prevented real action. International media covered the story extensively, with many foreign observers expressing bewilderment at the sight of an American president engaged in such a public war of words with a late-night television host. The BBC ran a lengthy analysis piece titled "What the Trump-Kimmel Feud Says About American Politics," while French newspaper Le Monde declared it a perfect symbol of American political discourse in the 21st century. As weeks turned into months, the feud took on a life of its own. Trump would reference Kimmel in speeches and interviews, while Kimmel would respond with increasingly elaborate comedy segments. The two men had become locked in a cycle of escalating rhetoric that showed no signs of stopping. What had started as routine political comedy had evolved into something much larger.
As the dust settled from the initial exchanges, one thing became clear. In the war of words between Jimmy Kimmel and President Trump, the comedian had managed to do what few others could: get completely under the president's skin, using nothing more than jokes, timing, and the power of the First Amendment. The feud had revealed something fundamental about both men and about the nature of power, humor, and ego in American public life. The battle was far from over, and America watched with fascination as these two masters of their respective crafts continued their very public war of words, each convinced they had the upper hand, neither willing to back down, and both seemingly unaware that they had created something that would be studied and remembered long after both of their careers had ended. In the end, the Trump-Kimmel feud became more than just entertainment. It became a defining moment that revealed the fault lines in American culture, the power of comedy to challenge authority, and the dangerous fragility of leaders who cannot bear to be laughed at. It was a uniquely American story, played out on the biggest stage in the world, with consequences that neither man had anticipated when it all began with a simple joke on a Tuesday night in March.